I
And
don't
we
know.
lost that.
Yeah,
There we
Zoom has
go.
been a little wonky today. I was doing a webinar and it failed on me. So I don't
Really?
know. Mercury retrograde. I don't know what's happening.
Oh, wow. Let's just please not have an attack from, yes, somewhere. I won't even say it because
Don't even say it. Don't even say it.
I won't say
Don't put that energy out there, Jay.
No, it's got to be good energy here. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Gotta channel the good vibes.
That's right. That's right. So let me provide a little introduction for those who don't know you, aside from, of course, this reference to the Nonprofit Lowdown. So everybody should be listening to that podcast. You are, among other things, a person who has been running in New York a consultancy for a number of years. Now, how many years have you been running it?
3 years.
3 years.
Not a terribly long time, but I've been in nonprofit my whole career and I was executive director for 12 and a half years. So that feels like a much more significant chunk of my life and energy, shall we say.
And outside the Reaverse, as you say, you've really been a force for change in New York in a real way. That you ran Breakthrough New York before. You took it from, as your own blurb for the new book says, from around a $200,000 organization to multi-million-dollar operation. And that was the product of course, a combination of intellect and strategy and force of will, all of which you have an ample supply. But the example you set is really a great one for organizations that are trying to grow. And I know that that's one of the things we'll be talking about today. But if people want to learn more about that, I want to say this first. You have a new book that's coming out, which is, in fact, I want to make sure I get the title right. Get That Money, Honey, the No BS Guide to Raising More Money for Your Nonprofit. And that is out imminently, right? So when is the release?
It's out. It actually dropped early. So it dropped this week, Jay. So
wow.
It feels a little bit like, after the fact. I'm just announcing to everyone that the baby was born. It came in at 2 pounds and 18 inches.
That's a good sized baby, a little light, but the book isn't, because it's over 180 pages. I do remember that because I'm trying to make
yes. Well, it's I tried to pack a lot in, but really what I thought about while I made the book is I wanted it to be a workbook because I think it's one thing to consume content. I mean, Jay, I'm sure you and I have between us read a whole library full of nonprofit books, and it's another thing to actually do something about it and put it to work. Right. So it's available via Amazon, on Kindle, and actually imminently will be an audiobook. So I'm just putting the finishing touches on that too.
That's probably a great place to start this discussion about unpacking, all this baggage that we have about money, because of course, whatever you're about to share, it'll be helpful to be able to then put that into practice. And sometimes that's practice makes perfect. And in fact, you have this line that reminded me of that. You said at the very beginning of the book, so I won't give anything else away, I promise. You begin with this classic quote from Napoleon Hill. And if people don't know that work, that's great kind of training ground for fundraising too, which is that whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. This idea that you have to be able to see it first before you can go forward. But of course, just conceiving it alone, you still have to put it into practice. It also reminded me when we were talking about doing this, about this movie Up in the Air. Did you ever see that film? Okay, so George Clooney with a backpack, and he's unpacking the things to show that we're carrying this thing around with us. And that's something that I know that I've had in my own fundraising work. And I don't know if you have or not, but you clearly have seen that this is a problem for
many. Gosh, Jay, where do we even begin? Also, I just want to let folks on the call know that if you stick around to the end, I will give you a free gift of a free chapter. So stick around to the end as a little Thursday gift. But yeah, so I talk about this in the book, but essentially I was a 26-year-old executive director, and I was, like many people, an accidental fundraiser, right? So fundraising was part of the job description. I'd never done it. And in fact, in retrospect, I wonder, who decided to put a 26-year-old in charge. But anyway, aside from that, I talk about this a lot. My first day on the job, they gave me the keys, they gave me the email address, they said, good luck. And I did 2 Google searches. The first search was, what does an ED do? And the second search was, how do you fundraise? So at that time, I'd only participated in, like those like marathon fundraisers. I hadn't actually done any fundraising at all. And so I really had to learn how to do it. So I took all the free courses. I mean, much like folks on the call are doing now, I took advantage of every seminar and every, book out there. Actually, fun fact, the person who wrote the Foundation Center Guide to Proposal Writing was someone I hired as a consultant to write proposals for me later on in my career. And literally just met with anybody who would take my call to ask how to do this thing. And what I found out was quickly that there was no one way to do it. I also found out that everyone sort of just learned as they went. There was no real formal training that anyone I had met, and everyone told a similar tale about being an accidental fundraiser. So fast forward, a decade, I had sort of figured out how to fundraise. I was raising $3 million a year in private funding, but I just thought, why did it take me 12 years to figure this out? Like, I'm a smart person. I should have been able to figure this out sooner. And so, I credit a lot of people, one of whom is Jennifer McCrae, who runs a fundraising course at Harvard. And for me, the missing piece was around this mindset, right? Because I think we can give you all of the content and all of the knowledge, but if you're putting it into a beat up box, which I think is sort of how I think about our mindset, all of the content will just fall through it. It doesn't do you any good. And so actually you mentioned up in the air. I like to think of Marie Kondo, like take it all out and then just put back what sparks joy for you. So if it's not sparking joy, it doesn't belong in your box. So anyway, all to say that is sort of one of the foundational things that we cover in my fundraising accelerator, because I believe it's about the inside out.
Right. And thank you for mentioning Marie Kondo, because that's a far more positive thing than the George Clooney up in the air analogy I made. But that idea about finding a way for this to be joyous is also really important, because I wonder sometimes if maybe it's that fear that we have that's part of our baggage that prevents us from doing the thing. Just like in the same way that Marie Kondo talks about, you don't know if you should give up this thing, because you kind of hold on desperately to things that remind you of your past. But if they don't bring you some kind of, I don't know, feeling of satisfaction or joy or opportunity, then it's really hard. So what are some of the things that really hold us back? What's the genesis? That fear?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I'm going to go all the way back to the 80s, Jay. So I grew up in San Francisco in the 80s and 90s, and it was the height of the AIDS and crack epidemics. And so if anyone has ever been to San Francisco, you'll know that there's a pretty large homeless population. And I was 8 years old. I was walking down the street and I saw an elderly man. He probably wasn't that old, but I was 8. So, everyone was old to me. And he had a sign that said something like, homeless vet, please help, something like that. I dug in my pocket and I gave him a quarter, and my father whipped around and he said, "Oh, so you're so rich now you could just give money away?" And so I had the experience of being in trouble, but not really understanding why. And I mean, this was a memory that I had buried deep inside. And so when I became an ED, I always felt like fundraising was a thing that was a necessary evil. But I never looked forward to it. I never found it interesting or joyful. It was just, I white knuckled my way through it. And it really wasn't until I unpacked this memory that I realized that in my family, money meant security and stability, because my grandparents had immigrated from China with $20 in their pocket, right? And so to them, money was the way that our family survived. And so to give money away to other people meant that we were giving up our survival, we were giving up our stability. And so subconsciously in my mind, I was asking people to give up their stability and to experience shame the way I had experienced shame, giving money away, donating to causes that you loved.
Right.
And that really changed for me. And I credit Liz, who was my board chair, but she was the one who I met when I was probably in my mid 30s, and she was like a very smart, very intense Upper East Side, lifelong New Yorker. And she, former Wall Street, like, the type. And she said, I asked her to join the board, and she said, like any smart person would, I'm going to need to see the budget before I join, which is a fair point. 2 days later, she called me and said, I have a problem with this budget. I started, breaking out in a cold sweat. I was like, oh my God. And she said, okay, so it looks like your board collectively is giving $30,000. I said, yeah, that's right. And she said, well, any board I join, that's unacceptable. The board is going to have to give more. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put up $50,000 and the board as a board challenge. And if they raise 50, or if they give 50, I will give an additional 50. The check is in the mail. So first of all, bless Liz, but also it just challenged all of these ideas that I had about giving and generosity. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, what if there are people like Liz in the world? Like, what if there are a lot of people like Liz in the world? And what if there are people in this world who delight in giving and who think of giving as an extension of their values? And it just blew apart everything that I had assumed about money and generosity and philanthropy and why people give and how they give. And ever since then, I've just really experienced joy, because I think fundraising is, you're essentially just throwing a party and seeing who wants to come to your party. And I think, so it's a very long-winded way of saying that I think what holds us back are the stories that we have from our families about, how our families talked about money, what we saw in our families, the emotional experience of money. Like in my family, the times that I saw my parents fight the most was about money, right? So of course, in my mind, subconsciously, money equaled anxiety, equaled tension. There's not enough of it. I heard, money doesn't grow on trees. What do you think we are, the Rockefellers? Like, oh, rich people are different, So of course, like you just accept all of it as true because you're a kid, and what frame of reference do you have to believe anything different than that? The problem is, to your point, we grow up and we haven't examined all of these things that we carry around. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was a very long-winded way.
No. I mean, there's so much in there. I mean, it's a really rich, so to speak, statement, because on the one hand, you made this discovery in a role where you had to make it, and you are also able to do it because you found a partner who is very generous, almost acting like a coach, not just for the board, but for you. What a gift.
Yeah.
Much more than even the money. But I wonder if there are several things in there. One of which is, for those who are listening, watching, and heard that experience, that is not uncommon, at least in my experience, with the immigrant experience. That is not to say that folks in China, for example, I don't know where your parents and grandparents were from, but there's a lot of generosity and philanthropy in that part of the world. So I just want to say that. But the immigrant experience, we've heard that a lot in my house. We've heard it from Depression era families, right? Who lived through it, and all those same phrases are phrases I've heard in my family. Like who do we think they are, the Rockefellers and all this other stuff, and you can't just give your money away. But all of us probably come to a point where we then face it. But most of us maybe haven't had the opportunity to confront it with a good and trusted partner like you had. So what are some of the ways that you have talked to people about looking within and finding that truth, and then finding a way to overcome their own fears?
Yeah, such a good question. And it, look, it's a work in progress, right? I think I'm undoing 40 plus years of programming here. But I mean, the first thing I think is to become aware of what the story is, because at the end of the day, the beliefs that we have are just things that we think over and over and over again, right? And then we believe it to be true because we think it a lot.
Right.
And so the first step is to just unpack, like, what do I believe about money? Like, I have a fun exercise, and folks on the call will get this, which is, common money beliefs, things like, well, like time equals money, money's hard to come by, rich people are different. Big one in our sector is, suffering is noble. Like, if I'm suffering, I'm eating real hard, right? If I'm bleeding from my eyeballs. And so I think the first thing is to identify, what are the things that I believe subconsciously. I think there's also the piece around going deeper. So there's an exercise I have in the book that is about, well, what did I hear in my family growing up? Did you hear we're not the Rockefellers, we can't afford that? Then what did I see in my family growing up, right? So we have these very, these moments in our lives that were very impressionable, usually when we're young. What kind of emotions do I have regarding money, right? So in my experience, I saw my parents fighting. That was an experience of anxiety and tension, because you're a kid, you see your parents fighting. That's obviously stressful. So, like, to me, money was a source of stress. So first is unpacking all the things. Then the second thing is to make different choices and say, okay, the thing is I can choose what I think. That's the wonderful thing about having a brain, right? Like we can make different choices. And so why don't I just write down on a piece of paper, what are the things that I would choose to believe instead? And more importantly, and this is really kind of where the rubber hits the road, because it's like, at the beginning of a year where you're like, I'm going to get in shape, right? And you sign up for a gym and like you go to the gym and then maybe you fall off and like come March, you haven't gone to the gym at all. It's because we have to embody the identity of the kind of person, right? So if I'm the kind of person, if I am by habit an athlete, then the habits that I will start to experience and practice will be one that aligns to my identity as an athlete.
Mhm.
Similarly, like I don't smoke cigarettes, not because I have to actively think about not smoking. It's because one of my identities is that I'm a non-smoker. So the habit is I don't even think about smoking because that's not who I am. And so we have to think about like, who do I want to be? Am I the kind of person who is accessing abundance? Am I the kind of person who can ask for big gifts? Am I the kind of person that can let go of all of the things that I've learned about money? And literally just like put it up, say it to yourself. I do a meditation every single day around abundance and telling myself different stories, because essentially what happens is your brain fires together, like synapses fire together, and the synapses that you have look for evidence, like confirmation bias of the way that you believe the world to be, right? So you actually have to actively kind of disaggregate and then come to experience and see different experiences and different emotional experiences
Mhm.
that challenge the pervasive belief that you want to change. I don't know. Does that help? That was
That makes, and that not only helps, it makes a lot of sense, because you've talked about forming a habit in order to form a habit. So it's the
right.
belief. It's going back to that quote, the Napoleon Hill quote. So you can believe it, so you can then practice it. Because otherwise, like that thing with a treadmill at the gym, you have to make a decision to go. You don't
Yeah.
just go and keep going. The habit is born from a choice. That's
Right.
that's pretty profound.
Well, and it's also noticing too, because if you decide the habit, or if you decide the identity that you want to embrace, like I would like to believe in generosity. I want to be the kind of person that lives in abundance.
Mhm.
Then challenge yourself to notice things that affirm your desired vision of the world. Because the thing is, everything happens, right? You can decide to notice whatever you want to notice.
Right.
But if you decide, if your attention is on lack, on scarcity, on people aren't generous, and this is really hard, your brain subconsciously will pick up on all those cues, right? Your brain is always trying to do your bidding. But if you're telling your brain, like, actually, I really need to focus on generosity and abundance and moments of like great connection and unlocking, then your brain will get trained to notice that. So I think we have this like really powerful computer that we carry around inside of our skulls
Right.
that often we're led by as opposed to leading.
I want to ask you if you believe by extension that it also acts as sort of a magnet, that the things
Yes.
that we believe in, we can also attract that kind of.
Yeah. Okay. So Jay, I want to be careful here because I know people will feel very woo-woo about this. And I'm a Northern Californian, so I do speak fluent woo-woo. But I think it's about energy, right? It's about what is the vibe that you're putting out there. So maybe people will understand this analogy. Like I'm married, I'm happily married, but there was a time, once upon a time, I was a single lady. And there would be these moments that I would go through where I couldn't catch a date to save my life, right? I was like, what is like nothing, it's a dry spell, nothing's out there. And the minute I was in a relationship, everybody wanted my number. And I was like, where were you when I couldn't catch a date? And it was because of the vibe I put out, right? It was because of kind of stepping into this flow of sort of ease of, it's not hard. I'm not desperate. Desperate energy is bad energy. No one likes desperate energy, right?
Right.
People like confident energy. They like abundant energy. And the other thing that I just want to point out is I think so much of the ways in which we approach fundraising is deeply rooted in scarcity. This belief that there's not enough. This is going to be the last person in the world I'm ever going to talk to with money. This is like, if I don't get this gift. I'm never going to get another gift again. Desperate, desperate energy. Empirically speaking, we live in the richest time in human history.
Right.
And I live in New York City, one of the richest cities in the world. You're telling me there's not enough money for you? That's ridiculous. They're literally printing money by the second at the Treasury. So it's never about, is there enough money out there? It's about, am I talking to the right people? Am I inviting people into partnership in the right way? Am I doing and saying the right things so that I myself can show up in a way that is confident, that exudes energy, that is about abundance? So I'll pause there.
Well, I mean, there are so many things about that too. So you talk about this kind of your origin story as being this 26-year-old suddenly in the ED seat. And that's a big leap for anybody. But you must have brought a certain confidence to that. There are some people who either are not confident or are not confident in their confidence, if that makes any sense. So how do they come to the place where they're also going to be able to step into that flow? I mean, part of it's the thinking about money, certainly, and that's the focus of our discussion. But part of it is also the way they think about themselves in relationship.
Yeah. So here's how I think about it, because I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to be the heroes. Right? Like, yes, I'm gonna like bring all these resources to the organization, and we're gonna do all these things, and I'm a hero. I'm gonna get a decorative parade, right? It's just so much pressure. Calm down. Instead, the way I like to think of myself is a facilitator. I think of myself as the Yoda, and the donor is the hero of their story. And as the Yoda, can I understand them? Can I hear them? Can I hear their story? And can I connect that story to what we're doing in our organization? I am simply a facilitator of resources, right? I'm an advisor, I'm a helper. And frankly, the other thing is, if the story they're telling me doesn't align, I'm going to bless and release, because like my mother said, there are a lot of fish in the sea. And I think sometimes we're so afraid, because we believe there won't be another chance. We're so afraid to let go of people who are not fully aligned with us. Like if you're talking to someone and they're going to push you off mission, or if you're not values aligned, or they make you feel bad, because that's a big one too, let them go. It's fine. You'll find more.
There was an old line. What is it? SW, 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 SW. I'm trying to remember what it stands for. Some will, some won't. So what? Someone's waiting.
Oh, so, I like that. I've never heard that before.
That was Jerry Panis always used to say that. But part of what you're saying also, this idea that you can just let go of it. That happens even before any of these meetings with any of these prospective donors or board members. You kind of make a decision that you're now, like you said, the Yoda, the facilitator, or the Samwise Gamgee, right? In the
yes,
Lord
right, exactly.
Instead of trying to be, I don't know who, what's his name?
Wow. Frodo? You don't have to be Frodo. Yeah, you can be Samwise, or you could be Gandalf. You can be Gandalf, right? You're just there because the thing is, and here's the big shift I made for myself is when I lowered the temperature on the pressure on myself to like deliver, like bring all the money, I could just be present with people, right? And when you show up with the energy around like, let's just have a conversation. Let's just connect. Let's see if there's a there. Yeah. Let's see if we can build something together. And if not, that's cool. And if so, awesome. Let's like be creative. Let's play. And so I think part of it is entering into conversations without expectation, because I feel like we get so emotionally attached to the yes. I have to get the yes, right? Or the pitch. I hate the pitch, right? Because the pitch is so transactional. It's so awful. I've never raised any money off the back of a deck. Like, I don't know what people are thinking.
I don't even like the word.
I hate the word. I'm on a one-woman mission to get rid of the pitch, because I think it's terrible, because where the generosity lies is the relationship, and the relationship is in the conversation, right? You desire to see something in the world. I do something that may align with that desire. If that is the case, let's put it together and let's build. Let's be partners. And if not, cool. Go find the thing. Go find your adventure that fulfills you. But I think the thing here is that we need to stop pressuring ourselves to make it. I don't know, like ultimately at the end of the day, we have no control over the outcome. Like we don't control if people say yes or not, right? It's on them. Yeah. The win is the ask. If you get the ask out of your mouth, but also the win is the relationship. Like are we connecting? Are we meeting each other as people? And so I say it's a little flippant, but I think it's true. I just teach people how to have conversations. That's it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to think about it, because um, if you mean in that case the prospective donor, or whatever we want to call these new friends, then the reality is they don't always have the words either, right? Maybe if you're coming without expectations, and it's a chance to really have a human conversation with someone about something that matters to you and you think might matter to them, you're giving them
Yep.
space to consider. You're not forcing them to do anything or trying to get them to, give you money or twisting arms or begging or anything.
Oh God, I hate that. I hate that.
Right.
We're gonna twist some arms. We're gonna go beg. We're gonna
Right.
go past the hat. I hate all of those things.
I know they're awful, and because they're also not only all transactional in one way, and they sound like the worst part of sales, but they also don't give space and room for people who we might make all these assumptions about, perhaps because they have some resources, or at least we think they do, that they already have an agenda and they know what they want to do, and so we have to somehow get them to see what we want them to see. But the reality is they're just people who are trying to figure things out.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Well, and I think that's the other thing too, is we have to pierce through the agenda on both sides, right? Because you think that they have an agenda because they're wealthy and you want some of what they got. They think you have an agenda, which is you want what I got, and you're going to try to tell me whatever you want, whatever you can to get what I got, right? So my friend Bray talks about the chasm of distrust. So there's this chasm between us.
Yeah.
And the more we can be aware of the baggage that we bring into the conversation, but B, also aware of our agenda, and instead make the agenda about human connection, then the whole tone of the conversation changes. Like when I realized that fundraising was really just about making friends, I was like, oh, I can do that. I am the person who goes to like chat with people on the grocery store line, right? I'm going to like chat up anybody because I just genuinely find people interesting and I'm curious about them. So when it became really about getting curious about people and understanding what they want in the world and what makes them tick, then like this job became super fun. I was like, oh, I'm just out here making friends. That's cool. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, when you're even saying that, I love that concept about curiosity being the guide, because then that gives us so much space to have real conversations again. It's sort of like this. You gave me the privilege, not just of talking to you today, but also that I didn't give you a list of questions. So as anybody listening can tell, this is not scripted. This is a chance to learn from you and have this conversation. But that's true with everybody we meet. It doesn't matter if we're sitting down with the conversation I bet everybody in this room would like to have with Mackenzie Scott right now. Not because she has a lot of money and is giving away generously, but just to figure out, well, what is she thinking? Because wouldn't we love to know that? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Not because we want a piece of it, but because we just want to know. We're like, what is it all about? That's a much more interesting place to be. I want to ask you a question about this baggage question. So we all come to that kind of discussion when we have it with that baggage, and hopefully now we're listening, thinking about different ways to unpack that so we become lighter and without that agenda. But it must be hard for the people we're meeting with too. So the person you mentioned that was this inflection point for you, that board member, that new board member, that's so exceptional in a lot of ways. It sounds like she was also the kind of person who had given herself space and time to confront these issues herself. So not knowing anything about her, she wasn't just a person with money and confidence. She was a person who was, making it possible for somebody else to do their best work. That seems to suggest she also had come to her own conclusions about money. She was comfortable with it. And not everybody we meet who, just because whether or not they have a lot of money, has had this thought process. When we come the way you said, kind of open and ready for conversation, does that help the other person too, even if they come to the conversation with baggage? How do we deal with their baggage?
Such a good question. So Jay, I think that the thing that I want to flag here is this assumption. You don't have to, you assume this assumption that because somebody is wealthy that they don't have baggage. Everybody has baggage. And oftentimes with people, in my experience, people with wealth, particularly if they're inherited wealth, there's a real sense of guilt about it, right? So like, just because they have money doesn't mean that they don't have baggage. We all have baggage. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is look, our job is not to be people's therapists, but I think the job of a fundraiser is to ask good questions, to prompt thinking that they may not have thought about before. But I think it's really important to ask questions that are genuine, not like I'm going through this list and just ticking this off because I think it's a good question, but it's like genuine curiosity about like, well, what do you hope for your children, and why does this thing matter to you? And tell me about your own educational experience, or whatever it is, you're raising money for conservation. Like, tell me about your experiences in nature, so that you sort of help them to delve into what matters to them. Because again, like, and I'm going to make a broad assumption here, but if you're like an important like corporate person, I don't know that you really have a lot of time in your life to do some deep reflection about what really matters. And so to the extent that we can, again, be facilitators and we can be the Gandalfs, right? We're helping them to start to hone in on the things that really matter. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to die. I'm sorry if that's news to anybody, but we are all going to die. We don't know when. And I hope for everyone on the call, it's a long, long, long time from now. But the other hope that we all have is that our lives have meant something to somebody. That's all we want. We want a sense of purpose, that we mattered in this world. And the more we can help our donors hone in for themselves what would make them feel that their lives were of significance and of purpose, the more we can unlock generosity.
And again, they don't necessarily, when I say they, I mean anybody we might meet with, they don't necessarily come with that pre-scripted either, right? About what's going to make their life significant.
Well, and I think that's what's so fun, right? You can sort of delve into the deep together. Like, right. I love when people say, that's a good question, I never thought about it before, right? Because that's when it's like, oh, okay.
That's
and
the
then
best
you just
compliment.
start talking.
Right. Yeah.
You just let them talk and let them think through it, right? Because they will also appreciate the opportunity to think more expansively about what is important to them.
Underneath all this, there's been this other conversation going on in our field about fundraising, that this kind of focus on another person, especially a person of significant wealth, somehow either increases inequities and imbalances in society and perhaps within an organization, or reinforces them. That if we are, it's sort of like they think that we might be catering to a person. What are your thoughts on that? Because in a way, I mean, what you're talking about is just a normal conversation like the one we're having. It just happens to be between a person representing an organization and a person who might consider contributing to one. That's the only difference. But then there's this whole question of power. And do you have any feelings about that?
Yeah. Do I have to? I've got feelings. So I assume what you're talking about is community-centric fundraising.
Right.
And a lot of what I believe is not actually at odds with community-centric fundraising, because I think what I'm talking about is a human experience. It's not a rich person experience. It's not a poor person experience. Like, we all as human beings want purpose and meaning in our lives. I just believe that. And so whether you're having this conversation with a member of, someone on your team, or someone who receives your services, or someone who's a potential donor, like, can we do people the honor of telling their own stories? Tell me who you are, right? Like, it's just about showing me and being able to tell someone who I am. What do I care about? What do I hope for in the world? And so I think the thing that feels uncomfortable to me with community-centric fundraising is, on the face of it, I believe it's right. I mean, I think we all come with resources. I like to think of fundraising as a potluck party. Like, everyone's going to bring something, right? Some people are bringing the main, some people are bringing the dessert, but we need all of it to make a party. I feel what's sort of unspoken underneath it is, I think it feels a little bit like class warfare, like some hostility around, people with money or people with power. That makes me uncomfortable, because I actually think that plays into a white supremacist notion of a hierarchy. Instead, I think the real community is when you realize that everyone has a story and that all the stories should be celebrated. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I think that's a beautiful response. It maybe it also goes to the heart that when you're talking about baggage that people bring, It's like you said before, everybody has baggage. And sometimes that influences our perceptions about all these things. It's not to in any way diminish those feelings. I feel like you do about community-centric fundraising being in many respects a way to recognize the imbalances that are here. But people who are supportive of a movement where everything is from the ground up, or other people who want, just a major gift program and a major university, or everything in between, those are all a reflection of not just the reality that people see, but maybe a little bit of the baggage that they bring to the conversation too. We all have, like you said, we all have baggage.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of the chatter I've heard about community-centric fundraising are things that make me uncomfortable. Are things like, well, these people should give us this money, right? Like that money doesn't belong to them. They should do X, Y, Z.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well,
Who gets to make that choice?
Here's what you end up shooting all over yourself. I mean, anyone who's worked with kids knows it. Like you could say should till the cows come home. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? And so I think part of it is understanding the stories that you're telling yourselves about other people's money and what they should or should not do with it,
Right.
which is one thing. And the other thing is, can you actually engage in a different kind of conversation where the person can shift their identity? Because if you become the kind of person who's generous, I'm the kind of person that supports organization, I'm the kind of person that gives of my personal wealth, that is a different set of habits and practices, right? And so sure, I guess you can shame people into giving stuff, you can guilt people into giving stuff, but at the end of the day, if you really want people as partners, they have to make the decision themselves.
Yeah. There's another piece of baggage I wanted to ask you about, because people make assumptions about people with a lot of money, but they also make assumptions about people not having resources or not having enough resources in order to give. Have you run into that as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think the other thing that just drives me a little bit crazy is when we equate diversity with lack of capacity, right?
Yeah.
So we'll say things like, well, on my board, like we need members of the community, which usually means, diversity, people of color, but there's like an either or there, which means that we also can't necessarily have people who can give at significant levels. So I think there's a lot there, but I'm going to have Holly Lee on my podcast in a couple of weeks. She's one of the founders of the Donors of Color Network. What we're seeing is there are a significant and growing population of folks of color with significant wealth. And and conversely, I think we also assume that people who are below a certain salary threshold are not going to be givers, are not going to be wealthy. Well, in fact, I actually think it's insulting to not ask people for money, right? Because you're making a decision about their money without them. I'm going to allow people to tell me no. They are grown people. They can decide what to do with their money or not. And so I actually have had instances where people haven't asked me for money because they might have assumed something about my capacity to give. And anyway, I'll just say that you can't assume, and you have to really connect and understand people.
Yeah. It's sort of like saying, I don't know if I should invite someone to my party because they might not have anything to wear. I mean, it's right. So whatever the context, making assumptions about people is never a very good thing. Although sensitivity is different, that's
right. I mean, I think it'd be sensitive, but I mean, Jay, have you ever had an experience where you're offended that you got invited to something? Like, how dare you invite me? Right. Exactly. No one's ever offended that they're not invited. Similarly, no one's going to be offended that you ask them.
No, it's the reverse, maybe.
Exactly.
Right.
And actually that happens a lot, interestingly, with people's closest friends and family. Like oftentimes with board members, for example, they will not ask their closest friends and family. And many times I think that their friends and family are kind of offended that they're not asked, like, oh, you're comfortable asking all these other people, but why wouldn't you ask me? I love you, I care about you, and therefore I probably care about the thing you care about. Why wouldn't you invite me to the party?
So let's talk about that, because I run into that, especially with emerging organizations, almost every single time, especially on the board.
Mhm.
Board members, either they've invited friends and family to serve on the board and then they won't ask them for support. Or people who have been appointed to the board won't ask others because that isn't a part of the culture or the job description or whatever. And isn't that just another bit of baggage? And what is that? What is that from? Why is that so?
Well, I mean, you're an expert in this, so I'm sure you have a lot to say on this, but I think it's again, our discomfort with money and the stories that we tell ourselves about money. And I mean, I think a lot of it might stem from, I don't want to be embarrassed, or I don't want my friend to ask me about, for support for their thing. So I'm not going to ask them for support for my thing, or they're going to have some kind of judgment about me because I've asked. So again, it's all the stories that we tell ourselves. But I think the other piece, and Jay, I'd be curious about your thoughts, is most board members don't understand the donor journey, right? They don't understand that a big part of it is the identification process. They don't understand the cultivation process. They think it's all solicitation. But oftentimes, like trying to set board members loose on their networks with a solicitation agenda is like the same as setting them loose in a singles bar and asking people to marry them. Like that's not gonna work, right? And instead, I think part of it is really educating them about, like, this is what the donor journey looks like, right? We're not going to just randomly ask your friends for money. What we're going to do is we're going to invite them to learn more about it. And if it seems like it's their thing, we will continue to engage with it. And if seems like it's not their thing, we will bless and release. Like, no one's trying to force anyone to do anything that they don't want to do.
Right.
And I think that's the correct, is the fear that you're going to force my people to do stuff they're not going to want to do, and it's somehow going to come back and embarrass me.
You've made at least 2 or 3 dating analogies during this, but you still haven't referenced swiping right, which I'm glad, because it seems like sometimes fundraising has gotten to the point, at least transactionally, where people are saying, well, maybe this one, maybe this one. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, instead of just letting people kind of be themselves in real life, which is
Yeah. Well, I mean, the swipe right. Okay, let's talk about the swipe right. Like, again, I was not single during the age of Tinder, so thank God. But I do think that a lot of donors make decisions on their own, like they self-solicit, right? And so that's why we need to have very good communications on our website. People spend about 8 seconds on a website. So if I don't understand what you do in 8 seconds and why it's important and what's in it for me, I'm on to the next thing. And I think sometimes in nonprofit, we try to be so, I don't know, kind of like flowery and opaque and grandiose, but saying nothing. We, the inequity of the world, we like level the playing field, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't
what
know
does that
what
mean?
means.
Yes.
Well, what does that mean? We fight inequity. We fight this. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Use plain English. Tell me the thing that you're doing and why it matters and what's in it for me.
Okay, one of the reasons why I'm telling people to check out your book and your podcast and everything is because of all the people in this sector, you are among the clearest, most direct, and I think the funniest people, in the field.
Thanks, Jay.
So, I mean, really, you get to the heart of it, and there is a lot of what somebody I knew in the giving sector used to call shoveling a fog. It's almost like we use a lot of words because we're not sure really how to get to the point. And I understand and sympathize with that. That's something I've suffered for my whole life. I mean, I grew up in Connecticut, so we never get but watch how much you laugh. I know you New Yorkers, but it's true. If we can just get to the point and make the in a sympathetic way where we're listening first and then we're telling people what it is we're trying to do, and then we invite them to participate. We're not strong arming anybody. We're just making it possible. But if we never invite them, nothing's ever going to happen.
That's right. Like if they're not invited to the party, they're never going to get to dance with us, right? You got to invite them to the party. Yeah. And a question came up. Is it okay if I answer the question, Jay?
Please go ahead.
From Amy.
Yeah.
So the question from Amy is, how do you address the perception of asking for money as begging? Many board members who are uncomfortable asking or inviting their friends and family because they are begging. I try to remind them we are investing in our community. Okay, well, Jay will have a great answer for this. I've heard him speak on this topic, but the first thing I would do is ask your board members, how they feel about giving money to things they care about, right? And so you'll often get things like, oh, I love it. I think this is really important. It's meaningful to me, X, Y, and Z. Then the next question is like, okay, so if that's true for you, could that be true for the people in your community? Could that be true for your friends, right? It's like, we're just opening up the aperture of what is possible. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess that could be true. If it's true for me, like, I suppose that could be true. Then you get into the question about money. I was like, okay, well, what is it that keeps us from asking, right? It's like rejection, embarrassment, fear of failure, da, 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 da. And then we just play it out, right? We're like, okay, well then, like, what are the possible things that you think your friends could say if you were to ask them to support this thing that you care about? And you get them to brainstorm 15 things, and then you brainstorm like what you might say, right? Because I think a big thing is it's about right sizing the monster. Like, when you have kids and they say there's a monster in the closet, and you open the door, like, oh, look, there's no monster in the closet. So the monster in the closet for your board members is this emotional thing, this emotional block about rejection, judgment, fear, etc. If you show them that there's no monster in the closet, it takes the temperature down. And then the other piece is getting them to commit to actual activities that aren't necessarily solicitation, right? There are plenty of things that they could do. They could take their friend out for dinner. They could host a dinner for their friends. They can meet a donor for coffee. They could make thank you call. Like, there are a million things that they can do that has nothing to do with asking for money that are still fundraising. And they need to understand that. Don't know if that answers your question, Amy.
And I have nothing to add. That's brilliant. But I do want to ask you a question, which is, sometimes I like to explore this because people fear what they don't see. It's sort of like you open the door to the closet because then you right size the monster. I love that. But also to show that there's no monster in the closet. So and so I like to ask people, what is the worst thing that's ever happened to you? So when you've asked someone for support, what is the worst thing that ever happened?
Yeah. Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, the worst thing that's ever happened to me? Well, I mean, if I'm being honest, I think kind of the worst thing might be happening right now, which is my dog is really sick, and he's old, so I'm sort of facing the imminent death of my dog. But
I meant in fundraising, not in
fundraising. Oh, I thought you meant like in life.
No, and I of course, if you want to talk about that, I'm sorry.
No, okay. Now I feel like I put all the cards on the table.
Wow, no, and this is important. This dog is so important. He's not just the dog we all love. He's the world's most spoiled dog, Stevie Wonder Dog. This is a big part of your life. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think he's on the mend, so knock on wood. Well, now I'm embarrassed. The worst thing that's ever happened is no. And I didn't die, right? I've had someone say like, hey, I really like what you're doing, but I think at the time they were, I can't even remember what, it was some other cause, some other thing. And it was like, yeah, that's really important too. So you should go do that thing.
Right.
Didn't die.
It didn't hurt. It's like
didn't hurt.
Yeah.
I wasn't on the cover of the New York Times. Like, no one blasted me online. I wasn't like publicly shamed. I wasn't fired. It was just like, okay, right. That's fine.
Considering all the things that have happened in fundraising, and I collect horror stories, that's more typical, right? That people say no, and actually it's a relief, because then it's a relief for that person, it's a relief for us. They get to go closer to the things that they love.
That's right.
It's all good.
That's right. Yeah. It's like, again, another dating analogy. Try not to date people who don't want to date you. If they don't want to date you, like, move on to the next person, right? So I think sometimes we get fixated on like, I have to land this one person. Why?
Why?
Like, shouldn't be that hard. Listen, I assume that you were not a 20-something woman, Jay, but my 20-something womanhood was I spent a lot of time chasing boys who didn't want to date me. And I was like, that seemed like a waste of time. I was like, I'm going to fix him. I've got a project, right?
Well, you were living in New York, where when my wife lived in New York, she talked about it was challenging. So there's a little context there. It's not like there's opportunity around every corner. There are a lot of people, but a lot of them are involved already. So but yeah, this idea about trying to find a match maybe the analogy is correct for many people, and that we're looking for people who love the same things we do. But unlike in love, if the person says no, we're not scarred for life, or we don't feel like, oh no, what do I do? I'm going to be running into the person every week, as we walk to work. I mean, that's not true with donors. If anything, in fact, I've run into this, maybe you have too, where there have been instances where someone said, well, my real passion is over here. And you might even be able to help them to find their passion.
Oh, I've done that. I've absolutely done that. Like people have said, my real passion is X, Y, Z. I'm like, you know what? I'd love to introduce you to someone who's doing that, because like I said, we're all going to die. We all want our lives to have meant something. And if I can help facilitate a thing that is going to be important to you, that's going to give you significance and meaning in your life, then I've done a mitzvah. Like, fantastic. Let me help you.
I love this. I know that we're about at the hour mark, and we didn't really let other people talk. So my apologies for that. We're going to make sure this recording is out there on YouTube for people to enjoy.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, everyone will know that like my dog is, dog is ill.
I'm so sorry about that. Yes.
I know. I'm like, I was very unclear. I was like, the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
No,
I've been in fundraising.
I do ask personal questions, but never in a form like this and not like that. And oh my gosh, no, that would be terrible.
It's okay. It wasn't that personal. Anyone who knows me will know that the dog is.
Now I want to see him. I know
he's like bopping around somewhere. I don't know where he is.
Okay. Well, we'll wait for the guest appearance next time. In the next appearance in the Philanthropy Masterminds and Dog series, hopefully he will be the Wonder Dog will reappear.
Yeah, he's like the mascot of Rio Wong Consulting.
Thank you so much for all of this. Really, it's as people can tell, I just enjoy talking with you. If you're watching this now or out there in the ether on YouTube, you will too. I want to encourage you to not only check out the Nonprofit Lowdown, which is really an exceptional podcast. And in a time when people talk about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, I want to say an additional thing about that podcast, which is she has so many different voices in the sector and has made a commitment to featuring them in ways that are so exceptionally rare that it's really a gift to all of us. They have a lot of great things to say, but they're also saying them from a lot of perspectives, and it's a gift to all of us. And this book is going to be a gas too. So not just for you, but for people in your office who have baggage and they need a way to work through that baggage. That's the book for you. So check it out. Get the Money Honey. You can check that out on Amazon, among other places. And if people want to find you, Rio, tell them where they can find your website.
Yeah, riawong.com, RHEAWONG. There aren't very many Rio Wongs out there. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. That's my main platform. So connect with me on LinkedIn. But I'm glad I remembered. I attached for the folks on the call a chapter of my book. So if this little amuse-bouche gets your appetite going, check out the book. And if it's not for you, don't buy the book.
Well, I'm sure they will enjoy it. And for those watching this on YouTube who can't get that link, you'll just have to reach out to Ria. So with that, I want to thank you for hanging out with us. Thank all of you for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, take care.
Thank you, Jay. It's such a pleasure. It was so fun.
A lot of fun. Bye.